Drudging classes of the hive unite. Worker, let not the bounty of your labors line the pockets of the guilders. To have more, we must take more. To take more, we must know more. Free yourselves and look to the serrated star for your salvation. The Book of Ruin. Slavery is so common on Necromunda as to be utterly banal to its inhabitants. After all, for those born into the servitude of the clan houses, what sympathy is there for those who must live their lives in chains? Chain lords and their shacklemen are bloated fight masters and slave drivers of the merchant guild, readily dealing in both human flesh and human misery. The greatest chain lords trade in entire domes, settlements, or manufactorums of slaves, sealing the fate of thousands with a single sweep of their hand. For most, though, they bring the merchandise with them, dragging lines of bent-backed men and women to market. Chain lords are often huge and idle souls, who have never had to lift a finger for their own comfort, their needs constantly seen to by a gaggle of servants, while their shacklemen enact their will. The Book of Peril. Vaire kept her gaze fixed ahead as a procession of serfs shuffled past. Her armor gleamed a gold bronze, the shoulder guards adorned with the symbol of an unbroken chain. Her iron-gray hair was held in place by a helm shaped like a crown. Though chipped and worn, all who saw it knew the story. The slave who had risen to chain lord, proof that even the lowest could ascend had they the will. Perhaps some found hope in the tale. For most, it was merely proof of Helmar's law. The strong clawed a path to power over the corpses of the weak. Fire Made Flesh by Denny Flowers. Hey there, scabby scummers and gangers, Crimson Oracle here, and I wanted to stop and say to everyone on this unusual Sunday video, happy May Day, happy Labor Day. Today is a traditional holiday across most of the world and among labor union aficionados that is celebrated to commemorate an event that happened, over 100 years ago in the 1880s that is euphemistically known as the Haymarket Affair, but it is more accurately called the Haymarket Massacre. It is a seriously important event in labor history, and we commemorate it every year, and I wanted to take a moment and talk about it because I think it's actually somewhat relevant to this stuff that we do with our little toy figures. It relates back in a way that fits with sort of the story that we all kind of interact with when we play Necromunda. So if you're wondering what this has to do with toy figures, don't worry, we will get to that. But first, I wanted to start with a little bit of history. In the 1880s, in the United States and across the world, a fledgling labor movement was trying to establish basic rights for workers. Things like protection from injuries on the job, an 8-hour workday, restrictions on child labor, that sort of thing. The situation, however, was that business and industry had all of the power, so the only way workers could ever achieve independence was through banding together. As it turns out, when your entire workforce is together on something, there's very little the people in charge can do to change it. The only option at that point is violence. Unfortunately, the state and private security agencies were both used extensively to fight labor using violence. Unionizers would be blacklisted, scabs would be brought in to break strikes, and there was an increased amount of militancy in the labor movement, with some workers' collectives embracing the idea of armed uprisings, seizing equipment in factories, and fighting for a revolution. In 1886, a general strike was called on May 1st to fight for the 8-hour workday. A general strike refers to when workers across industries strike all at once. They're difficult to organize, but devastatingly powerful as they are so disruptive. They're also, of course, illegal for unions to participate in today in the US due to how the US laws favor industry over labor, but I don't want to get sidetracked. Workers across the United States gathered in the streets to agitate for an 8-hour workday. The chant, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will, rang out across the United States, with between 300,000 and 500,000 workers participating in the strike. Chicago was the center of the labor movement at that point, with an estimated 30,000 people on strike, and even more on the streets protesting. On May 3rd, at a rally at the McCormick factory, striking workers confronted strikebreakers at the factory's closing bell, and police fired on the crowd, killing at least 2, though reports conflict and say as many as 6. In response, labor leaders called an emergency rally the next day in Haymarket Square. The rally in Haymarket was peaceful, with speakers cycling through the afternoon, but tensions were high because of the presence of police in the square. At 10:30 p.m., after the final speaker concluded, the police decided to clear the square and advanced on the crowd. Someone threw a bomb, which exploded and killed a police officer, triggering the police firing indiscriminately into the crowd and, apparently, each other. When the smoke cleared, the square was empty except for the bodies of the fallen. In response, the state snapped into action, ruthlessly persecuting the labor organizers and anarchists who had been agitating in the city. 8 individuals, most only tangentially related to the event itself and only 2 even present at the time, were given a show trial by a biased judge and a jury who admitted to being biased against the defendants. All were convicted. 7 were sentenced to execution, though 2 of those sentences were commuted, and the other 5 were either executed or in one case committed suicide the night before scheduled execution. It's unknown who actually threw the bomb. It may have been one of the anarchists present, it may have been an infiltrator, as they were known to use violent means. This kicked off an early form of what would become known as the Red Scare. The owners of capital rapidly organized and used their power over the press to ensure the demonization of anarchists and communists as dangerous, violent, and counterproductive. Moderate labor organizations denounced their anarchist and militant allies in an act of cowardice. The labor movement would continue to grow, but the countervailing force against it became better organized and stronger. In time, the state-sanctioned murder of labor organizers and protesters killed in Haymarket would become a rallying point. The influential anarchist Emma Goldman wrote that learning about Haymarket was what set her down the road to becoming an anarchist. International Workers' Day became a staple of the labor movement, one so potent that the United States made a point of not setting the American Labor Day on May 1st, as it is in most other countries, instead choosing an alternative day in September that was linked to the founding of the Knights of Labor. So what does this have to do with Necromunda, a science fantasy game set 38,000 years or so in the future? The hellish serfdom of Necromunda is hardly the fantastical dystopia we make it out to be. In truth, our world is full of living and working conditions that would shock the conscious. And it was far, far worse at the time of Haymarket. Workers risked outright murder for their dissent. The Pinkertons were no more cautious or restrained than the enforcers of Necromunda. While we mostly view the game through the lens of the gangs, they are in truth not the lowest of the low, generally. Instead, the gangs are closer to petit bourgeois. They are responsible for holding territory, ensuring it's productive, that the guilds and the noble houses get their cut. These are a rare few who get to manage the fortunes of others. No, the vast toiling class, the drudges as they're sometimes called, live a life of menial service, worked hard, fed as little as possible, and forced by threat and coercion to push themselves past their limits. The workers of Necromunda suffer endless indignities. So why then do these teeming masses not rise up? Well, the answer is that they do. A lot. Worker uprisings are a regular and brutal occurrence on Necromunda, and they're infectious. As workers hear of the deeds of the past, they're inspired to themselves rise up and smash the machinery, seek red-handed vengeance against their exploiters. But sadly, they're almost always crushed immediately. Any dissent is treated as not just a crime, but heresy. Possessing labor tracts, engaging in labor organizing, these are capital crimes on Necromunda. The successful are often paraded in front of the serfs as a sign of what they could become if they stay docile. A small chance at making it is enough to keep many with their nose to the grindstone, even as their body breaks from underneath them and they are discarded, chewed up by the very machinery they're helping keep turning. Literally so on Necromunda, since they'll eventually be rendered down into food for the masses. So brutal is serfdom, entire settlements exist in the deadliest places on Necromunda, the bad zones, where those who aren't protected from service can hide from the slaver entourages and find work. But of course, this leaves these individuals open to exploitation and mistreatment, as they'll starve if they can't find work. But there are those who will take in the outcasts and organize them. Unfortunately, in the dark reflection of our world that is Warhammer 40k, even the forces of liberation are in fact a new kind of oppressor. Either the hellic cults of the Chaos Gods or the Genestealer-infested cults. This fits with the everybody is awful theme of 40k, but it also speaks to the brutality of Helmar's reign. They have such a tight grip on Necromunda that the merest mention of organizing is a capital offense. In this environment, only the most powerful labor movements could survive, and it would make sense that those empowered with otherworldly influence would be the few who do. Militancy has benefits. A militant labor organization is able to defend itself. It may be able to directly seize the means of production. It's a harder thing to put down, and those who you kill become martyrs for the survivors. Haymarket is the kind of historical event that echoes throughout time, and in this case, art. Necromunda is, something of a complex web of ideas and genres smashed together, but part of the core of Necromunda is a labor parable, a story about the division of power among wealthy and influential individuals kept in conflict with each other to ensure that they don't organize together to rise up against their rulers. Necromunda is a feudal hierarchy, certainly, but it has elements of capitalism within it, profit motives, that sort of thing. And what's interesting about it is that it has many of the examples of problems that we encounter in the real world, even down to the fact that there is a democracy on Necromunda in a hive known as Gothrel's Needle. And I would like to do a whole episode on them at some point if we ever get much more information about them. Unfortunately, I've scoured all of the text so far, and the references are scant. But Gothrel's Needle, itself a democracy, is functioning in a way that it is being corrupted through manipulation of the vote and slowly turned toward the way of the rest of Necromunda. And that's a fitting example of the erosion of rights by the forces of capital. This one hive where people are actually treated decently and where they're somehow still able to make their quotas. The exploiters are working as hard as they can to remove those protections and reinstate their system of hierarchy. And you see this play out across the industrialized world as countries move to improve the lives of workers. You see this snap back on the part of capital. And they try to put workers in a position where they are subservient, where they don't have the freedom to move, the freedom to find other work. They want to keep people trapped in a cycle of poverty. They want to keep them docile. They want to keep them distracted. And so they have people fight each other. And that's what goes on in the United States. You have enormous industries designed around creating the impression, just as the yellow journalists did back in, back in history, to manipulate public opinion. They create these false conflicts, these things that drive people to fight each other. And they keep us from looking around and noticing that the people on top are always getting their interests met. The needs of the billionaire class are always taken care of. But the needs of us, the working class, are so rarely addressed that even the concept of actually getting what we want it's absurd. It's treated as a fantasy that we would have affordable housing, that we would have guaranteed healthcare, that we would have all of these basic things that the labor movement has been fighting for over 100 years. The idea that those things are not possible is an effort of marketing. They keep you distracted. They want you fighting the person next to you. And the worst part is that they have empowered such a movement of violent, virulent, it's difficult to talk about calmly and rationally. Watching what's happened in the United States, the way that minority groups have been completely demonized and targeted, campaigns of obvious bullshit pretenses, campaigns of complete pretense, which are not predicated on any kind of actual serious problem, they're done simply to keep everyone distracted, to keep everyone fighting about something else, because we have an actual solution to the problem of this mass accumulation of wealth and power. We can take things back. And that includes the actual means of production as those original anarchists in the 1800s wanted. The idea that you have to work for a boss who gets his directives from a CEO who's hired by shareholders, that's an artificial structure. We don't have to live in that system. Workers can manage themselves. Workers can collectively own things. It's possible for another world to exist. And this day, May 1st, is about envisioning that possibility. And, you know, I like to think about it. I like to think about what that looks like in places like Necromunda. And I've been working on this very idea. If you check out, I have a link. If you check out my audiobook that I've been publishing for the last, not quite a year, I've been going through and doing a chapter, you know, it's not exactly every month. It's all over the place, but I'm on chapter 22 right now. I'm currently writing. And it's about a full-on legitimate labor uprising on Necromunda, not one that is infiltrated or harnessed for chaos or any of that stuff. And I'm proud of what I've done with it. It's not done. It's a serialized format. I've been doing it as an audiobook. But I want to envision Necromunda going through these kinds of labor struggles in the way that happened in our real world. So that's what I've been working on with that. It's only just the start of the uprising at this point in the story. So there's lots more to come. But, you know, I'm thinking about that a lot. I'm thinking about kind of how the concepts that, you know, of what we, you know, I say we, I mean, we as labor organizers, as anarchists, as socialists, people who are fighting for the, you know, not just comfort, right, but liberation. And that's how I want to frame that kind of struggle, is like there's a difference between asking for an 8-hour day and asking to own the work line. And I think that we have to ask to own the work line. So that's my take on that. I don't espouse a particular variety or tendency of Marxism or anarchism. I'm not picky about it ideologically. I have issues with many different varieties of leftists about various topics, as we all likely do. Everybody argues on the left. That's how it is. But I just wanted to take, you know, a little bit of time today to tell the story of the Haymarket Affair, to talk about the conditions of labor, the way that the struggle for the rights of the laborer is co-opted, and how we can do better, you know. At least that's how I think about it. So I'll probably talk about this more in various ways in the future. I'm working on a whole series that will have a lot of discussion about capitalism and you know, artwork in in a little bit. So you'll get more information about that in the coming weeks. But in the meanwhile, thanks everyone for watching. Support your local labor union. Think about bringing a union to your workplace. We can liberate ourselves, but we can't wait around for someone else to do it. That's basically my take. So with that, this labor is done, you know, completely gratis. Nobody's Nobody at YouTube is paying me right now. The side effect of not being monetized or what have you. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Not that they pay out very much, so not that is really what matters. But I would like to thank. It's a good segue. I'd like to thank my patrons, who actually are lovely, wonderful people who are helping to keep the lights on, so to speak, around here. I appreciate you guys, and thank you so much for helping me do this. I added a new tier to Patreon, a $2 tier. So if you are interested, you can become a Scavvy level supporter at $2. And of course, if you are interested in giving more, I do take up to $25. And at $25, I'll even let you record a spoof commercial on my podcast and run it between segments. So, think about it. And of course, don't forget to check out the podcast. I've got an endless amount of Necromunda content on there. And with that, everybody stay safe and don't forget to change your paint water.